Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be discussing Chapter 16, which is on motivating operations. This is from the Cooper, Huron, and Heward textbook, the 3rd edition. We're going to be covering the 5th edition task list items from Section B and Section G on the ones that are focused on motivating operations. So we'll be discussing task list item B12, which is define and provide examples of motivating operations. We will also be reviewing task list item G2, which is use interventions based on motivating operations and discriminative stimuli. Before we get started with the lecture on motivating operations, I'm going to act out a scenario for you guys. And it's going to be obviously something that was made up, but I'm hoping that you'll be able to find some particular aspects of the scenario that you are able to relate to or that resonates with you. I personally experience things very similar to this all the time, but with different stimuli. So I hope that you are able to identify personal experiences with different stimuli, perhaps, that you are able to relate to so that you are able to better understand the content that we're going to be discussing in today's lecture. So let's get started. Let's pretend I'm talking to my friend John and I say, "Hey John, do you like going to the movies?" And he tells me, "No, I hate going to the movies." So then I respond to John, "Well, that's a shame. I heard this new Deadpool movie was coming out." And John looks at me and says, "Deadpool? I love Deadpool." Then we see John sneakily moving off to the side and purchasing a movie ticket. After much anticipation, the day of the movie finally arrives, so John gets in his car and drives to the movies. Once at the movies, he can't help but smell the aroma of the delicious, delectable popcorn. So what does John do? He goes and he buys some. And, well, of course, if he's going to get popcorn, he has to get soda to go along with it. Ah, yes. Finally, it's time for him to go sit down and watch that movie. He can barely wait. Ah, but wait! John forgot something. He forgot to season his popcorn. Oh my goodness, how could you forget the delicious popcorn seasoning? Oh no, and he also forgot his straw. Good thing though that he saw the straws when he went to go get popcorn seasoning. The end. So this scenario is going to set the scene for the topics that we're going to discuss in the next few slides on motivating operations. But before we get started on talking about those topics, I want you to think about certain things that John did. Why did John go to the movies if he says to his friend that he doesn't like the movies? Or to me, I'm his friend. What made him drive to the movies on that day, on that particular day? Why did he get popcorn? Does he normally like popcorn? Does he normally purchase popcorn? Or is there something else that drove him to get popcorn? And why did he purchase the soda along with the popcorn? He said he has to purchase the soda along with the popcorn, right? So these are things I want you to keep in mind and consider as we go through today's lecture. And then finally, why did he grab a straw when he saw one? And why did he season his popcorn? Now let's expand a little bit on the scenario to further understand how motivation plays a role in the particular behaviors that John was engaging in. In the first example, John says he does not like going to the movies. However, as soon as I told him that Deadpool was playing in the movie theaters, he said, "Oh my goodness, I want to go to the movies." And he purchased himself a movie ticket. This particular example is an example of how the value of certain stimuli is going to vary conditionally based on different environmental factors that are available in that particular moment. So for John, because we could say that in this particular example, there hasn't been a Deadpool movie for 2 years. Because there's now a new Deadpool movie that's come out and there's deprivation from a Deadpool movie, that has increased the value of going to the movie theaters for John, and he's now going to engage in behaviors in order to gain access to watching the movie. So let's analyze what that written out contingency would look like. If you guys recall, I've talked to you guys about antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. So our A, B, and C, right? Antecedent, behavior, and consequence. And I've talked to you guys about several different antecedents. I've told you guys about SDs, which signal the availability of reinforcement. I've talked to you guys about STPs, which signal that punishment is available or might occur if you engage in behavior. And I've also discussed with you guys the stimuli for extinction, the S deltas, which are those that signal that reinforcement is not available for engaging in behavior. Well, in the particular example that we just discussed with John, I told John that the movies that Deadpool was playing in the movie, I told John that Deadpool was playing the movies. This functions as an SD. It's signaling the availability of reinforcement. Okay, but it's not a simple SD response consequence relationship. In this particular case, there is something else at play, and that is motivation. There is motivation that's at play. The motivation needs to be present in order for him to engage in this behavior. Like I said, John doesn't typically like going to the movie theaters, but because the Deadpool movie is playing, and I let him know the Deadpool movie is playing in the theaters, and because he's never seen this Deadpool movie, that increases, that serves as a motivating operation. And I'll break this down for you guys in the next few slides, but this serves as a motivating operation, meaning that it increases the value of this particular consequence, which is to be able to watch the movie, and it increases the behavior to gain access to this particular reinforcer. So if we look at the contingency for John's behavior, you can easily see that it's not a simple reinforcement contingency that's maintaining his behavior, meaning it's not just a 3-term contingency or the SD response consequence. Let me write that out for you guys. It's not the SD response consequence contingency that is at play here. Instead, it's that 4-term contingency. That MO is a key component here. Okay, because suppose that John had already seen the movie and I said to him, did you know that Deadpool movie is playing in the theaters? That particular SD would not have functioned to get him to engage in behavior of going and purchasing the movie tickets and going to watch the movie, because there was no motivation, because he had already seen the movie. So at that point, if John does not have motivation, he would not have engaged in this particular response. And so what this goes to say is that the value of certain stimuli is going to vary conditionally. It's going to vary based off of our motivation in that particular moment. Okay, so either we are deprived of particular activities, particular items, whatever it might be, or we are satiated on them. And so when we are satiated, we are less likely to engage in behavior in order to gain access to those particular stimuli, because the value has been decreased. So now that you've heard me mention motivating operations, or MO, a few times, let's look at the definition for what an MO is, and let's look at the breakdown in the next few slides for the different components that make up a motivating operation. Okay, so a motivating operation is an environmental variable that does 2 things. First, it alters, meaning it can increase or it can decrease the reinforcing or punishing effectiveness of a stimulus, meaning it can make the stimulus either more effective at reinforcing or punishing, or it can make the stimulus less effective at reinforcing or punishing. And then it also alters the behavior that we engage in order to gain access to that stimulus, or to not gain access to that particular stimulus. Okay, so now let's break down motivating operations a little bit further. Motivating operations can be broken down into what we call establishing operation, which is an EO, or into an abolishing operation, which is an AO. And I'm going to break each of these down even further so that you can understand what is meant by each of these. So an establishing operation, or an EO, is a motivating operation that increases the effectiveness of some stimulus functioning as a reinforcer. So an establishing operation, an example of that could be food deprivation. And an establishing operation will have a value altering effect and a behavior altering effect. Actually, both establishing operations and abolishing operations are going to have value altering effects and behavior altering effects. And what a value altering effect is, it's basically it basically means that we are going to modify, or this establishing operation or the abolishing operation are going to modify the value of a particular stimulus functioning as a reinforcer. Whereas a behavior altering effect means that the establishing operation or the abolishing operation is going to modify, meaning increase or decrease, behavior that we engage in order to gain access to a particular reinforcer. So I'm going to break that down a little bit further now. So I'm going to focus on the behavior altering effects and the value altering effects specific to establishing operations. So let's say that we have an establishing operation, which is you're deprived of food. So you haven't had food in a long time. What happens is that increases the value of getting food as a reinforcer. So it establishes the reinforcing effectiveness of food, meaning that that there's a value altering effect, which is the reinforcer establishing effect, okay? Then we have the behavior altering effect, which means that because you are deprived of food, it is going to evoke behavior, or we are going to engage in behavior in order to gain access to that particular reinforcer, which is food, okay? So the behavior altering effect in this particular case is that we see an increase in all behavior that has been reinforced by food. So I'll break this down for you guys even further. Let's say that you have been deprived of food. What's going to happen is it's going to establish food as a reinforcer. That's that value altering effect. And it's going to evoke behavior, which typically results in you getting food or you getting that reinforcer. Okay, so the establishing, when we're going to use the word establishing when we're referring to the value altering effect, and we're going to use the word evocative or evokes when we are referring to the behavior altering effect of the establishing operation. So I'll just repeat that one more time. So with the establishing operation, if there's an establishing operation present, which in this particular case is food deprivation, so if you've been deprived of food, that deprivation will establish food as a reinforcer and will evoke behavior in order to gain access to that particular reinforcer. Okay? And then I have a funny little image here for you guys, which says, never go grocery shopping while you're hungry. And the reason that people suggest this is because if you go grocery shopping when you're hungry, you have this EO that's in place. And because this EO is in place, that increases the value of food, which means that you're going to engage in behavior. This will evoke behavior that will result in you getting food. Okay, so it's going to increase all behavior that has been reinforced by food. So you're going to purchase more food than you normally would if you had not eaten food. If you had eaten food prior to going grocery shopping. Now let's begin our discussion on abolishing operations, or AOs is how you'll also hear this term be referred to. An abolishing operation is a motivating operation that decreases the reinforcing effectiveness of a stimulus, object, or event. So an abolishing operation is basically when the effectiveness of a reinforcer is reduced or is abolished because you have already satiated that need for that particular reinforcer. So if we were talking about the food consumption, to kind of continue with the example that we were looking at in the previous slide, if we were looking at food consumption, eating food or being satiated on food serves as an abolishing operation, which abolishes the value of that particular reinforcer. So we are no longer going to engage in behavior. We are going to abate behavior that results in gaining access to food. Okay, so those are the value altering and behavior altering effects, which we also had value altering effects and behavior altering effects within the establishing operations. But in the case of an abolishing operation, the value altering effect is when we see a decrease in the current effectiveness of that particular reinforcer. So in this case, food is going to be less valuable and it's not going to function as well as a reinforcer. So this means that there is a reinforcer abolishing effect. So it abolishes behavior, and it abates behavior that typically results in getting access to food. That's that behavior altering effect, meaning that there is a decrease in all behavior that typically results in being reinforced by food. So to put this into simpler terms, if you have recently eaten a ton of food, let's say you had a large plate of pizza, having consumed so much food serves as an abolishing operation, okay, which abolishes food as a reinforcer and abates behavior that typically results in you getting food. So you're not going to be going out of your way to pick up more food or to get more food. If a friend invites you out to dinner, you're more likely to say no because you've already satiated that need for eating. Okay, so this is why people typically suggest for you to go out to buy groceries, when you have already eaten a ton of food, so that you are less likely to want to go and purchase more food, because the value of food has been abolished and it abates behavior, meaning you're less likely to go and engage in behavior to gain access to food. So it's better to shop on a full stomach and not go grocery shopping on an empty stomach, which is typically an establishing operation, meaning that you will you're more likely to go out and purchase more food because the value of food is higher for you in that particular moment. Now let's talk about motivating operations related to painful stimulation, okay? And we're gonna again look at the establishing operation and the abolishing operation. Both the establishing operation is gonna have a value altering effect and a behavior altering effect, and the abolishing operation will also have a value altering effect and a behavior altering effect. So let's focus our attention first on an example of an establishing operation in terms of painful stimulation, okay? So if you're experiencing pain, let's say you have a migraine, okay? I personally suffer from migraines. So let's say that I have a migraine. Me having a migraine serves as an establishing operation, which establishes pain relief as a reinforcer. So it establishes, let's say, for example, medication. In my particular case, if I take medication, it might possibly reduce my headache, my migraine. And so it establishes that pain that I'm experiencing establishes medication as a reinforcer, meaning it's altering the value of that medication in that particular moment. Outside of the context of me having pain, medication is not something that I'm seeking or that is valuable to me. But because there is this establishing operation present, then medication for me is valuable in that given moment, okay? So it establishes medication as a reinforcer, and now I'm going to engage in behavior, or this establishing operation is going to evoke behavior, right? Listen to the terms that I'm using, establishing and evokes. It's going to evoke behavior that's going to result in me getting relief from that pain, okay? So that's what's going to serve as a reinforcer in this particular case. The relief from the pain stimulation or the pain reduction is the reinforcer in this particular case. Okay, let's say that I've taken medication, I'm feeling all better. Now, because there's a decrease in painful stimulation, that serves as an abolishing operation, which means that because there's an abolishing operation, the value of gaining access to medication is going to be decreased, okay? So there's a decrease in the reinforcing effectiveness of pain reduction, meaning because I don't have pain in that particular moment, I'm not going to go out and seek medication. My pain has already been reduced. So in that particular moment, I'm no longer needing medicine, which means that it's going to abate, or I will abate behavior
that will typically result in me getting medication, okay? So the value of medication reduces. When there's an abolishing operation present, the value of the pain reduction reduces, and I'm not going to engage in behavior that typically results in me getting pain reduction because my pain has already been reduced or is non-existent in that particular moment. Okay, now let's talk about how to distinguish between MOs and SDs. If you recall the four-term contingency, you'll see that we have the MO, we have our SD, discriminative stimuli, then we have the response that the individual engages in, and then the consequence that follows. Well, both MOs and SDs are what we consider antecedent stimuli, okay? And they're antecedent stimuli because they occur before the response, right? So both of these are antecedent stimuli that occur before the response, and they alter the frequency of some particular behavior, or they are able to evoke behavior in some way. Okay, so MOs and SDs are both antecedent variables, but the way that they affect behavior is different. SDs are operant variables that influence response frequency because of its relation to reinforcing or punishing consequences. So SDs in particular are correlated with the differential availability of an effective reinforcer in the past, meaning that an SD gains its control by being associated with reinforcement. So in the past, in the presence of a particular stimulus, a response has received reinforcement. So what ends up happening is that stimulus ends up signaling in the future that reinforcement is available. So in the presence of that particular stimulus, we are more likely to engage in behavior. Whereas there are other stimuli called S deltas that do not signal the availability of reinforcement, or they signal that reinforcement is going to be withheld. So in the presence of those particular stimuli, we don't engage in behavior. So a simple example of an SD would be an open sign on a door of an establishment that you want to go into to purchase something. So let's say I want to purchase some clothing, and I go and I stand in front of this store that I'm trying to purchase from, and I see that they have the open sign. Well, in the past, when I've seen the open sign, I've been able to go inside. I've been able to purchase the clothes, which is my reinforcer. So I've been able to access my particular reinforcer. What ends up happening is this stimulus, the open sign, ends up becoming a discriminative stimulus, which signals the availability of reinforcement. It signals that I can engage in behavior in order to access a particular reinforcer, which in this case, I can go inside, I can purchase something in order to access the reinforcer of clothes. Then we can have our S deltas, which is when, for example, you see a closed sign. And remember, S deltas are stimuli that signal that reinforcement is not coming, or that or that there is an extinction schedule in place, right? You can engage in behavior, but you will not receive reinforcement. Reinforcement will be withheld, okay? So an example of that is a closed sign. So when you see a closed sign and you try to go inside to purchase something in the store, you can try to pull on the handle of the door, you can try to pull on the door, but you're not going to be able to get inside. You will not contact reinforcement. Reinforcement will be withheld. This is an example of you being on an extinction schedule, okay? This is different from the SD in that when you are in the presence of an S delta, you are not likely to engage in behavior in the future, simply because your behavior is going to be placed on extinction. Okay, so now I want you to think about this. I mentioned to you guys that the open sign is an example of an SD. This is an antecedent stimulus that signals to us that reinforcement is available for us if we were to engage in behavior. An SD does not mean that we will engage in behavior. We don't engage in behavior every single time that we are in the presence of an SD. Okay, there are other driving factors that may make us more likely to engage in behavior in the presence of SDs, or less likely to engage in behavior in the presence of those SDs. So that driving factor is a motivating operation. The motivating operation is what's going to make us, in the presence of that particular stimulus, engage in behavior or not engage in behavior. So if I have a need to go inside and purchase something, then I'm going to go inside and purchase something, right? If I have that MO to go in and purchase something, then I will go in. But if that MO is not present, the likelihood of me acting on that particular SD and engaging in behavior to gain access to the reinforcer is very low. An easy example of this is when we're hungry. Let's say that I am hungry and I drive by a Taco Bell and I see that the lights for the Taco Bell are on. Those lights of the Taco Bell being on function as an SD. They signal to me that Taco Bell is open and that I can go inside and I can purchase some food. Now, every time I drive by a Taco Bell, I don't go inside and I don't purchase food. And the reason for that is because our behavior is largely dependent on motivation, right? On that current motivation that we are experiencing in that moment. Do I have a deprivation? Have I been deprived of food in that particular moment in order for me to go in and purchase food? Okay, so there has to be an establishing operation present. The establishing operation will increase the value of food, so it will establish food as a reinforcer for me. And then it will evoke behavior, right? So I'm going to go in and purchase food because there's that establishing operation in place. Now, if there was no establishing operation in place, if there's an abolishing operation in place, meaning I have already eaten food and I drive by the Taco Bell and I see that the lights are on, I'm not going to go inside and I'm not going to purchase food. So that's going to have an abolishing effect on my behavior. And it will abate behavior to gain access to food. I'm not going to engage in behavior in order to get access to food. Okay, so that's really the key difference between SDs and MOs. SDs are signaling to us, if you want access to this reinforcer, it's available right now. You can engage in behavior to gain access to this reinforcer right now. However, do you have the motivation to gain access to this reinforcer right now? Are you interested in accessing this reinforcer in this particular moment? And motivation is not something that we technically have to be aware of. We sometimes are motivated for things. There's establishing operations in place, and we don't even know, right? We are not aware personally that there is an MO in place. So here is another example of how you will respond differently based off of the different discriminative stimuli that are available to you and based off of whether you have motivation or an establishing operation present in that particular moment or an abolishing operation present in that particular moment. So let's look at how each of these is going to affect our behavior. So let's consider an example in which you have an EO present, which is a headache. So you are experiencing painful stimulation, you have a headache, and let's say that you keep your medicine in a bathroom cupboard. So the SD in this particular case is the bathroom. You're in the bathroom, which is where you keep your medicine typically. You have the headache, so you have the motivation already present. So because you have a headache, you are in the presence of the bathroom, you're going to look for the aspirin in the bathroom cupboard. You find the aspirin, you take the aspirin, and now you don't have a headache, okay? If this occurs enough times, that bathroom is going to become an SD for in the future looking for aspirin when you have a headache. In this case, this is like the whole contingency played out here. Let's imagine it's already played out a few times, and so now the bathroom has already become an SD, which signals the availability of a reinforcer, which in this particular case, the reinforcer is the aspirin. Okay, so there's an establishing operation present. In the future, when you have an EO present and you are in the bathroom, you're going to engage in behavior in order to gain access to the reinforcer of the aspirin. Again, the difference here is that the establishing operation is the headache, right? The painful stimulation, and the SD is the bathroom. Let's say that you did not have a headache. If you don't have a headache and you are in the bathroom, are you going to be likely to search through the cupboards to get access to an aspirin? The answer to that is no. You can be in the bathroom to do many other things. But if you don't have a headache in that particular moment, if there is no headache, that means that there is an abolishing operation in place, then you are not going to engage in behavior in order to gain access to that aspirin, because the value of the aspirin has been abolished. Okay, so behavior is also abated. Notice the terms that I've been using throughout this entire lecture. When you have an abolishing operation, which in this case an abolishing operation is the headache, and then the no headache, then behavior is going to decrease. It's going to be abated. And that's because the value of the reinforcer, the aspirin, has been abolished. There's no need for you to gain access to aspirin because you don't have a headache in that particular moment. Okay, this is a topic that is generally very difficult for people to understand, but I think if you break it down in this way, in a logical way, you can think that we don't engage in behaviors when there's no desire, when there's no need for that particular stimulus. Okay, and it's the same exact situation here. And now let's look at the one example in the middle. So I think the example in the middle really highlights the difference between an SD and an S delta and an MO for you guys. Okay, so let's say that you have a headache. Remember, again, the headache is an establishing operation. It establishes pain medication or pain relief as a reinforcer. Let's say that you have a headache, but the bathroom is where you keep your medication, right? The bathroom is the SD, which signals that reinforcement is available. The pain relief is available there. Well, you don't keep medication in your kitchen. So because you don't keep medication in your kitchen, the kitchen is going to function as an S delta, meaning that your behavior will be placed on extinction. Okay, you can still engage in behavior, but you're not going to contact reinforcement in this particular context. Okay, and so in that particular context, you are less likely to engage in the behavior of looking for aspirin and not finding aspirin, which is going to result in you not finding aspirin, okay? So what's going to happen is, in the presence of the kitchen in the future, you might look for aspirin. You're not going to come into contact with aspirin, right? You're not going to find any aspirin. So in the future, you are less likely to engage in behavior in the presence of the S delta, right? And when you're in the kitchen, because in the kitchen is not where you keep medication. And when you have engaged in the behavior of looking for aspirin in the past, you have not found any, okay? So I hope this helps you differentiate between EOs, AOs, and SDs and S deltas. Remember, the SDs signal that reinforcement is available, but just because it signals that reinforcement is available, it does not mean that we are going to engage in behavior. We will engage in behavior if there is an establishing operation present. The establishing operation establishes that particular stimulus as a reinforcer, and it evokes behavior in order for you to gain access to that reinforcer. This is an example of an EO that establishes pain relief as a reinforcer and evokes behavior to gain access to that particular pain relief. All right. Then we have our abolishing operations that abolish stimuli as reinforcers, and it abates behavior. So we don't engage in behavior in order to gain access to that particular reinforcer. And then we have our S deltas, which simply signal to us that reinforcement is not available right now. You can engage in behavior, but if you engage in behavior, you're not going to contact reinforcement. So what's going to happen is, in the future, you are less likely to engage in behavior in the presence of S deltas. Okay, so now I want you guys to practice distinguishing between the different types of terms, or the different types of antecedent stimuli. We have SDs, S deltas, establishing operations, abolishing operations, and I also want you to practice using the terms evokes, abates, establishes, abolishes. So I threw some little examples in there for you. So I created a little scenario for you guys. Pretend that Jimmy is a young boy. Jimmy has his mother's home that he lives in, and then he also frequently visits his grandmother's home. And let's pretend that his mother is not a big fan of sweets, so she doesn't keep any sweets in the home at all, but his grandmother always keeps sweets at home, and his grandmother always provides him with sweets when he requests sweets. Whereas his mother, even if he were to ask for sweets, she typically says no. So considering all of these different variables, how people respond in the different settings, I want you guys to go ahead and answer some of these questions along with me. So in this example, Jimmy's mother is a blank for asking for sweets. So think about which response you would put in this particular statement. Okay, so hopefully by now you've taken some time to answer that question or answer the fill in the blank. In this particular case, Jimmy's mother is an S delta for asking for sweets. So the reason that she's an S delta for asking for sweets is because she signals that sweets are not going to become available, or that even if he were to ask for sweets, that will not be reinforced. Okay, so that is an extinction stimulus. It signals that reinforcement will be withheld or reinforcement will not be provided, even if he does engage in the behavior of asking for sweets. So in the presence of Jimmy's mom, he is not likely to ask her for sweets. She should become an S delta. The next statement says, Jimmy's grandmother is a blank for asking for sweets. Take a second and think about what you think this response is. Okay, so Jimmy's grandmother is an SD for asking for sweets. She should signal that reinforcement is available. And I'm sure you guys have seen this in some contexts or have experienced this yourselves, where you are more likely to ask someone for help, maybe because that person is more likely to reinforce your request for help, or maybe you are more likely to go to your grandmother's house and request sweets because you know that that's something that is likely to get reinforced in the presence of that particular person. So these are different examples of people, which people can be stimuli, people are stimuli in the environment also, of people functioning as SDs, meaning that you are likely to go and engage in behavior in the presence of that stimulus because that behaving in the presence of that stimulus has typically resulted in reinforcement. So Jimmy goes to his grandmother and requests sweets because in the past, when he has asked her for sweets, that has contacted reinforcement, meaning that she is an S delta. An SD in this particular case. Jimmy's mother is an S delta. The next statement says, Jimmy just ate a hot fudge sundae and feels full. Being satiated on sweets is an blank operation that blank the behavior of asking for sweets at grandma's house. So take a second to try to fill in both of those blanks. Okay, so I'll walk you guys through this one as well. So if Jimmy just ate a hot fudge sundae and he feels very full, that acts as an abolishing operation. So being satiated on sweets is an abolishing operation that will abate the behavior of asking for sweets at grandma's house. So we'll see a decrease in that moment, in that particular moment, in the behavior of asking for sweets. And that's also because the value of sweets in that given moment has been abolished or has been decreased due to him being satiated on sweets already. The next statement says, after an entire day at mom's house without any sweets, and then in parentheses it says blank operation. You have to think about what operation you think it is. Is it an establishing operation or an abolishing operation? Okay, so after an entire day at mom's house without any sweets, sweets are blank as a reinforcer and blank asking grandma for sweets. So take a second and think about what you would put in each of these fill in the blanks. This one's a little bit harder, but hopefully after I give you the response, it helps you understand what I was going for here. Okay, we'll start off with the first part of this statement. So after an entire day at mom's house without any sweets, And then what kind of operation is that? Is it an establishing operation or is it a abolishing operation? So if you've been without sweets for the entire day, it's likely there's an establishing operation in place, because it's like a case of deprivation in a sense. Okay, so you've been deprived of sweets at mom's house, so now sweets are established as a reinforcer. That's that establishing operation. That's the value altering effect. Okay, and evokes asking grandma for sweets. Okay, that's the behavior altering effect. Now you are going to engage in behavior in order to gain access to those sweets. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit more about establishing operations, abolishing operations, and the behavior and value altering effect, we can revisit the example that I gave you guys at the beginning of this lecture, and we can answer the first two questions about why John engaged in the particular behaviors that he engaged in. Okay, so two of the questions that we wanted to answer were, why did John go to the movies if he doesn't like the movies, right? Remember, I asked him, hey, John, do you like the movies? And he said, no, I don't like the movies. But then I said, oh, well, they're going to be playing the movie, the Deadpool movie. And he was like, oh, my goodness. He was going to go to the movies and he purchased the movie tickets. So the reason for that is because there was a state of deprivation. And there's an establishing operation in place, right? We told him that the Deadpool movie, this new Deadpool movie was going to be showing at the theater. So that's a state of deprivation. That now makes him more likely to want to go to the movies, because the value of going to the movies has increased. So now he's going to engage in behavior. It will evoke behavior, which will result in the reinforcer of him being able to watch the Deadpool movie. And then I want you also to think about what made him drive to the movies on that particular day that the movie was showing, but not all of the other days that he was waiting, right? What made him drive on that particular day that the movie was showing? The answer to this is that particular day is the SD. It signals to him that that's the day that he's going to be able to go into the movie theaters and get access to his reinforcer. He can technically still drive to the movies all of the other days, but he's not likely to, because those other days function as S deltas. They signal that extinction schedule is in place, okay? They signal to him that if he were to go and drive to the movie theaters, he's not going to contact reinforcement because his movie showing is not on that particular date. So that's really why we engage in behaviors on some moments and not on other moments, is because we are differentiating between SDs and S deltas that are occurring at any given moment. So we do tend to engage in behavior in the presence of SDs, and we can still engage in behavior in the presence of S deltas, but we're not going to be met with reinforcement. And because we're not met with reinforcement over time, our behavior is extinguished and we stop engaging in behavior in the presence of those particular stimuli. So I'm sure there have been moments where maybe one of you guys has driven to work on the wrong day, and you're like, you arrive there and the door is closed and you're like, oh my goodness, it's a weekend, why did I drive here? Or I'm sure some of you guys have shown up to a movie showing on the wrong day, or whatever it could be, and you've shown up on the wrong day and then you don't contact reinforcement. Well, that's an example of an S delta. So that's exactly why John goes only to the movies on the day where his movie is showing. Now, I'm going to go over some other content, and then we'll get back to answering the next few questions about why did he get popcorn, why did he get a soda. Actually, you know what? We can actually answer the last question as well, why did he grab a straw when he saw one. I just realized that that's one that we can cover based off of the information that you've already been exposed to. So John, if you recall, John had gone, he had gone and he had gotten his soda, he had gotten his popcorn. He was walking to the movies already when he realized that he hadn't seasoned his popcorn and he hadn't gotten a straw. So actually, when he went to go season his popcorn, he saw the straws next to the popcorn seasoning. So that visual of seeing the straws served as an SD in order for him to go ahead and grab the straw. Okay, the motivation was already there, but he hadn't been in the presence of the SD, and so the SD almost served as a reminder, or as a reminder for him to go and engage in the behavior of grabbing the straw and utilizing it. Okay, now let's begin discussing our next topic. Now we're going to discuss the distinction between unconditioned motivating operations and conditioned motivating operations. So in the previous few slides, I've talked about different types of motivating operations, and two of the ones that I've mentioned are food deprivation and painful stimulation. Food deprivation and painful stimulation are events or stimulus conditions that we experience in our lives that are unlearned. Okay, these are unlearned or unconditioned motivating operations, meaning that from the moment of birth, from the moment that we are born, these are stimulus conditions that really affect us in that they make reinforcement valuable. Okay, so in the case of food deprivation, food functions as a reinforcer without that having been conditioned. It's an unconditioned motivating operation that is reinforced by food. And in the case of painful stimulation, that's an unconditioned motivating operation that is reinforced by access to pain relief. Okay, that is something that is not conditioned. We are naturally predisposed, you can say, to feel relief from painful stimulation and to seek out relief from painful stimulation. So humans are born with the capacity to be affected by food reinforcement as a result of food deprivation and by pain reduction reinforcement as a result of pain onset or increase. So these MOs are going to be classified as unconditioned motivating operations because of the unlearned aspect of their value-altering effects. I'm going to break down what this means. So think about a baby that has been deprived of food or hasn't eaten for, let's say, 2 hours. That baby, the value of getting access to milk is much higher, right? Because they've been deprived of milk for a few hours, now they are more interested in seeking out that particular reinforcer. And that particular reinforcer of food is not something that was learned, it was an unlearned reinforcer, right? It was an unconditioned reinforcer for them. And that deprivation of food naturally increases the value of gaining access to food. Okay, but now the behaviors that the child engages in, that the baby engages in throughout their life, those are learned behaviors. So a baby learns, and pretty quickly they learn that by crying they can get access to food, or eventually, by saying milk, they can get access to milk. Or in the future, when they can say more complex sentences, or they can shrug at their mom, or they can, have bigger tantrums or whatever it is, they learn that there are different behaviors that they can engage in order to gain access to those particular reinforcers. But in the case of an unconditioned motivating operation, these motivating operations are considered unconditioned because of that unlearned aspect of the value altering effect. So the food was naturally valuable to that baby. It's not something that they had to learn. And now the behaviors that help them gain access to that reinforcer, those are things that they had to learn. So deprivation of food, water, oxygen, activity, and sleep, those are all considered unconditioned motivating operations. We all require food, we all require water, we all require oxygen, activity, and sleep. And so we all are going to feel a state of deprivation if we haven't had access to those different stimuli, different activities for a while. Okay, and these states of deprivation of these different stimuli are going to have reinforcer establishing effects. So they establish these particular items or activities as reinforcers. So and they're also going to have evocative effects, meaning that we are going to engage in behavior in order to try to gain access to these particular reinforcers. So the first one, this one up here, the reinforcer establishing effect, that is the value altering effect that establishes these particular stimuli as reinforcers. And then this is the behavior altering effect. It will evoke behaviors to gain access to these particular reinforcers. Okay, so we are more likely to now engage in behaviors to gain access to these reinforcers. And then food and water ingestion, oxygen intake, being active, and sleeping, all of these particular activities have reinforcer abolishing effects and abative effects. Okay, so when we are satiated on food, when we have had enough water, when we have taken a big deep breath in where we can't keep breathing anymore, when we have been very active, like you just spent 2 hours at the gym, or you just ran a mile, whatever it is that you've done, you've ran after a toddler, right? Or when you have slept a lot, that is a need that has been satiated. Okay, so satiation of certain needs, of these different needs up here, are going to have abolishing effects on our behavior. Abative effects on our behavior, and the reinforcer is going to be less valuable. Okay, so it abolishes these particular stimuli as reinforcers. These are not going to be as valuable to you anymore, right? That's that reinforcer abolishing effect. And it's going to abate our behavior, meaning we are going to engage in those behaviors less. So now let's look at this table. It's table 16.1. This is included in your textbook. And we're going to go over each example with the different UMOs. We're going to talk about their reinforcer establishing effect, which is that value altering effect, right? How is it altering the value of that particular stimulus as a reinforcer? And we're going to look at the behavior altering effect, or the evocative effect. What behavior are we evoking? Okay, so in the case of the UMO, food deprivation, right? You've been deprived of food. That increases the effectiveness of food as a reinforcer and increases current frequency of all behavior previously reinforced with food. So whatever particular behavior you engage in that typically results in you getting access to food, that's the behavior that you are going to engage in. That is the behavior that will be evoked. Okay. In the case of water deprivation, this is a UMO. When you have been deprived of water, it establishes water as a reinforcer, and it will increase all behavior that has been previously reinforced with water, and so on and so forth. You can go through every single one of these, and you can see, look, let's look at the one of becoming too warm. When you have become too warm, okay, it establishes a decrease in temperature as a reinforcer, and so now we are going to engage in behavior that will result in you becoming cooler. Will typically result in you becoming cooler. You can go through every single one of these examples. You can pause the video and see what the value altering effect and behavior altering effects are going to look like for each of these different unconditioned motivating operations. On this slide, we have unconditioned motivating operations that decrease reinforcer effectiveness and abate relevant behavior. These are all going to be abolishing operations. So first we have food ingestion after food deprivation, right? After you've consumed enough food, that decreases the effectiveness of food as a reinforcer, and you are less likely to engage in behavior that will result in getting food. After you consume water, that functions as an abolishing operation. Right, water ingestion functions as an abolishing operation, which decreases the effectiveness of water as a reinforcer. That then also has an abative effect, which decreases the current frequency of all behavior previously reinforced with water. Okay, so of course, after you've had enough water, you've been satiated on water, the value of water is going to decrease. That's that reinforcer abolishing effect, or that value altering effect. And then we are going to engage in less behavior in order to gain access to water, and that's that abative effect. Okay, the term abative is going to be corresponding with that behavior altering effect that we see in the presence of abolishing operations, and they have the value altering effect is that it abolishes the item as a reinforcer, or that activity or the stimulus as a reinforcer. Okay, so after having had enough sleep, that decreases the effectiveness of sleep as a reinforcer, and then we engage in other behaviors, decreases the current frequency of all behavior previously reinforced with sleep. Okay, so we're not going to engage in behaviors that typically result in us getting access to sleep, and so on and so forth. You can look through the rest of these to get a sense for the different unconditioned motivating operations, and the reinforcer abolishing effect and the ablative effect that corresponds with each of these. Now let's discuss conditioned motivating operations. Conditioned motivating operations, or CMOs, are motivating variables that alter the reinforcing effectiveness of other stimuli, objects, or events, but only as a result of the organism's learning history. So it's very similar to a UMO, an unconditioned motivating operation. The difference is that there's learning history that's attached. So there are specific motivating variables at play that have become motivating operations due to the learning history, or due to being paired with unconditioned motivating operations in the past. Okay, so there's some UMO that was paired along with a stimulus. That stimulus acquires a motivating operation function, okay, and then it gains that behavior altering and value altering effect, just like a UMO has a behavior altering and a value altering effect. So there are three types of CMOs. We have surrogate CMOs, we have reflexive CMOs, and then we have transitive CMOs. We're going to jump into discussing all three of these in the next few slides. And then I'll provide examples. Make sure that you understand the examples and how each of these applies in the real world, because these are things that we are experiencing all the time. And it's important that you're able to discriminate between the different CMOs. I would say that CMOs is one of the trickier concepts within behavior analysis to for students to typically understand or to discriminate between. So make sure that you go through the next few slides, that you really have a solid understanding of the definition that accompanies each of these different CMOs, and that you understand the examples that goes along with each of these. And try to come up with your own examples as you are listening to the slides, or what I'm saying on the different slides. So the first one that we have is the surrogate conditioned motivating operations, which you will hear the term CMOS. Okay, you need to know that abbreviation that goes along with it. A CMOS is a stimulus that acquires its motivating operation effectiveness by being paired with another motivating operation. And then what happens is that stimulus acquires the same value altering and behavior altering effect as the MO in which it was paired with. And by the way, the MO that it's paired with is usually an unconditioned motivating operation. So I'll give you guys examples of this. So again, to just kind of reiterate that, a CMOS is a stimulus that acquires its effectiveness as a motivating operation due to being paired with another motivating operation. Okay, so try to remember that this is the one where you are pairing the UMO with another stimulus, and what happens is that new stimulus kind of becomes a surrogate. Okay, that's why it's called a surrogate conditioned motivating operation. It becomes a surrogate, or it takes the place of that original UMO. So let's go over some examples. So an example of this would be seeing a bathroom sign, which typically seeing a bathroom sign is paired with you going into the bathroom and, voiding, right? Being able to urinate or being able to defecate. And so that means that bathroom sign has been paired with a UMO in the past, okay? So what ends up happening is in the future, when you see a bathroom sign again, even if you've just gone to the bathroom, you might want to still go to the bathroom because that bathroom sign has been paired with that UMO. So now the bathroom sign alone becomes a CMOS, and it starts to have the motivating operation effectiveness. So it has then the stimulus alone of the bathroom sign starts to have behavior altering and value altering effects. So then we engage in behavior of going in the bathroom, even though we don't really have that desire to go to the bathroom because we had already voided previously. We had already gone to the bathroom previously. So another example of this would be seeing a restaurant after you go to dinner. So you're already full, you have been satiated on food, and yet because just you see a restaurant in front of you, it increases motivation, right? It increases the value of getting food, and you might engage in the behavior of going inside and purchasing food, although you don't have that typical UMO, which would be food deprivation. And this really occurs because in the past, the side of that restaurant has been paired with you going inside, getting food, and satiating that need for food, right? So that side of the restaurant, that stimulus, has been paired with the UMO. And then what happens is over time, just the side of the stimulus, the side of the restaurant alone, gains that motivating operation effectiveness. Okay, acquires that effectiveness. And so now that particular stimulus of seeing the restaurant alone is a CMOS. And so you're going to engage in behavior of going and eating, although you are not necessarily deprived of food. Okay, I'll give you guys a personal example. So one day I went with my mom. I was, hanging out with my mom, and she took me to this place to buy churros. And I don't typically eat churros. However, that day the churro place was paired with, my mom was paired with a UMO, which was food deprivation. I had been hungry. She took me to this place. We ate some churros. I liked the churros. So what happened was my mom was paired with the UMO. And then what happened to me for a few weeks after was every single time that I would see my mom, I would want to go and buy churros, and I would tell her, hey, do you want to go eat churros? And my mom essentially became a CMOS, okay, where she acquired that MO effectiveness by being paired with the churros or the food deprivation in the past, okay? So what would happen was every time then I would see my mom, I would want to go get churros. Another example of this, I don't know if many of you experience this, but I personally do. I don't typically eat popcorn. I'm not a big fan of popcorn, actually. However, every single time that I go to the movies, I will purchase popcorn. And what has happened is the same exact thing. Going to the movies in the past for me has been paired with eating food, and that food was popcorn, which satisfied that the food deprivation. It satiated that desire, that need. And so now every time that I go to the movies, I always purchase popcorn, even if I've just eaten a full meal. So that's an example of the movies becoming a CMOS, which increases the motivation or the desire for me to get popcorn, and it increases behavior that results in me getting popcorn. So it has that value altering and that behavior altering effect. Next, we have the reflexive condition motivating operation, which is also known as the CMOR. And the CMOR is a stimulus. It's not an SD. It's a stimulus that acquires the MO effectiveness by preceding some form of a worsening or improving condition. Okay, I like to think of this stimulus or this CMOR as a warning stimulus that warns us that something negative is coming, some worsening condition is coming, or some improving condition is coming. And so what happens is we start to, it increases the value of engaging in behaviors that will result in the removal of that particular stimulus. So in the removal of that negative consequence or that negative interaction. And then it increases behaviors that results in us removing that stimulus. So an easy example of this would be a child. This really is, the CMOR sometimes is what occurs when we see negative reinforcement happening, and like when we analyze the antecedent stimuli that are occurring in negative reinforcement contingencies, a lot of times we can find a CMOR that's in place as the antecedent stimulus. There's other antecedent stimuli that might be at play also. There could be some SDs at play, but oftentimes we'll find a stimulus that's functioning as a CMOR. So an example of this is, let's say that a teacher is giving an instruction to students, telling them, okay, we have 1 minute left, and in 1 minute we are going to leave playtime and we're going to go do our work. That instruction can function as a CMOR because it signals, like I said, it's like a warning stimulus. It signals that a worsening condition is coming. The student's not going to be able to play any longer. They're going to have to now go and do work. So by the teacher warning the students, we have 1 minute left. Now that what happens is it evokes behavior within the student of wanting to, let's say, escape or elope. They might run from the teacher. They might throw a tantrum when they give that particular warning in order to avoid having to go and complete work. So in that particular case, the teacher saying, okay, we have 1 minute left, is functioning as a CMOR that's signaling that there's a worsening condition coming. And so that individual, then it increases the value of engaging in avoidance behaviors in order to avoid having to participate in the next activity that's coming up. Some other examples of CMORs would be a tornado siren. So a tornado siren, alerts people that a worsening condition is coming. So it increases the value of engaging in behaviors to prepare for maybe a possible tornado that's coming, and to be able to take cover or whatever different behaviors can help them to reduce the effects of the negative effects of the condition that's upcoming, right, of the tornado. Okay, so the tornado is a CMOR, the tornado siren, is a CMOR, but it's functioning as a warning stimulus. It increases the value of engaging in certain behaviors that will essentially ameliorate the worsening condition. And also it increases behaviors that will result in that reinforcer. Okay, I have some other examples on this slide for you guys as well. Let's review those. Okay, so this next example that I have for you guys here, I want to explain prior to going over it. Have you ever been in a situation where you are driving or someone else is driving, you're going in one direction, there's a car coming in the opposite direction, and the car starts to flash their lights at you? Okay, this means different things for different people depending on the region where they live. For some people, a person flashing their lights at you is to signal to you to turn on your own lights. In other situations, a person flashing their lights at you is actually to signal to you that there's a police ahead. And if you know that there's a police ahead, then that might signal to you that you should reduce your speed because you don't want to get a ticket. Okay, so that flashing light is going to function as a CMOR in the situations in which they're signaling to you that there's a police ahead. You're going to reduce your speed, right? It increases the value of reduced speed, and it's going to increase behavior that will result in you driving at a lower speed. Okay, so that stimulus of flashing their lights functions as a CMOR in this particular case. So the few examples that we've talked about for the CMORs are those stimuli that are occurring prior to a worsening condition, but I want to make sure I go over an example with you guys where the stimulus occurs prior to an improving condition. Okay, so it's a stimulus that's going to function as a warning stimulus that an improving condition is coming. Okay, not that a worsening condition is coming. So an example of this is, let's say you're already in a dangerous situation. Maybe you are in a house that's being robbed at that particular moment, and so you somehow call the police. You're hiding in a particular spot where you are safe, and then all of a sudden you hear police sirens. That sound of the police sirens could be a sign of an improving condition, so it'll function as a CMOR. Okay, that's going to then evoke behavior that will result in you safely getting to the police. So you might, that will increase the value of you leaving that safe spot that you're in, and will increase behavior that will result in you being able to possibly get to the police, because the police, in that case, might be the improved condition for you, right? It'll mean that you will be safe, that you're not going to be in danger any longer. So that's an example. So here in the police siren is an example of a CMOR that is signaling an improving condition is coming because it's occurring prior to an improving condition.